No one saw this coming as we have multiple Leafs updates to go over today, including some shocking moves that Craig Berube has made to the lines. We also have some updates surrounding Max Pacioretty and a wild stat with Morgan Rielly that has fans fired up. And speaking of fired up, Craig Berube, according to those in practice, was absolutely going nuts, going bonkers at the team today. So to break all it down in this episode, but before we get into it, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been unbelievable. We will be live following tomorrow night's game, so make sure to stay tuned for that as we enter the home stretch of games here with only a little bit left in the regular season and less than a month away to the playoffs. With Darius, the Leafs are coming off a horrible loss against the Predators. You have to move on from that, especially with the Florida Panthers win yesterday. The Leafs are trying to win the Atlantic Division, which is what all eyes are on right now. And Craig Berube also agrees that the Leafs played bad against the Predators because he's come out, not only been fired up at practice today, which we'll dive into in a little bit, but he has put the lines in a bit of a blender here again. And I'm actually very encouraged by these lines. I think these are the best lines we've seen the entire season from Craig Berube. And let's dive right into it. You can see the lines at practice here. The top two lines remain the same, but there's been some movement now in the bottom six with David Kampf once again being put out, which is a little bit surprising. He's been playing okay. Really not great, but again, between him and Yarncroc also doesn't play great either. Lawton, Domi, Robertson on the third line with Lorentz, Holmberg, and Yarncroc on the fourth line. We also have Scott Lawton coming out and speaking out a little bit about how he's feeling in Toronto. But Darius, this is interesting. I really like the look of that third line in particular, but it's interesting that Scott Lawton, the guy they gave up a first-round pick for to be their third-line center, has bounced from the fourth line now back to the third line, but keeping Max Domi at the center position. And this might be some foresight into what the playoff lines may look like depending on what happens here down the stretch.
I think we're getting closer to what it's actually going to look like in the playoffs. And again, the defense pairings weren't really changed. And I think Benoit and OEL has been an interesting mix. It has worked at times. I think Benoit and Carlo have looked really good. So I think they're going to continue to tinker with those a little bit, but they do remain pretty much the same. I think they're trying to make as best as they can Rielly and Carlo work. So no changes on the defense. But like you said, on offense, first two lines untouched. And we know that Bobby McMahon, he was playing great with Domi and Robertson. That was a great little third line for the Leafs, putting up some numbers. But I do think that McMahon plays better himself individually on that second line. And I do think that the second line is better for it because they have been the Leafs' best line the last couple of games, honestly. They've looked really, really good. So I feel like it's going to stay that way for the playoffs. And then when you look at the third line, Holmberg is he's a smart hockey player, but he's been killing a lot of the offensive, drive out of that third line. So now he moves down to the fourth line, center position. David Kampf comes out, which I think is interesting. I think when push comes to shove in the playoffs start, Kampf will be in the lineup, but I think they're trying to figure out what works best with every single player and in pairs because Berube likes to work in pairs. And Lawton's going to get a really good chance here to play with Domi and Robertson, where he can chip in for a goal here because Robertson's always driving play, as we know. He's very shifty, and then Domi's been playing a lot better recently, that's for sure, compared to the rest of the season. So he has a great opportunity moving up in the lineup here. And again, the fourth line, I'm interested to see what Holmberg does there because Holmberg, he's shifted down two lines now, if we're paying attention the last little while. And I feel like he's kind of running out of leeway here. Maybe the leash is getting a little bit shorter. And I wonder if he makes his way out of the playoff lineup as we get closer to the end of the season, though.
Yeah, I would prefer David Kampf probably over Pontus Holmberg on the second line you mentioned, then down to the third, and now completely, I mean, not completely out of it, but in the fourth line, the next logical step would be out of it depending on how he's playing. He also just hasn't played well at all. And Scott Lawton on the wing, he was playing on the wing against his former team, the Philadelphia Flyers, that they play tomorrow. That's where Torts was put him because he wasn't doing well at center. Now, obviously, the Leafs forced the issue a little bit, tried to play him as the third line center because that's what they want him to be in the playoffs and come playoff time. But he's looked a lot better, still not good, but a lot better at the wing position. Even in the fourth line, driving some play, had his best game as a Leaf. We both said it in the live stream against the Predators, even though it was kind of overshadowed by the fact that they had a really, really poor game. And at the end of the day, that fourth line is what's going to be. I mean, the top two lines are going to probably remain the same come playoff time. You mentioned it. I think McMahon now, he's been in the second line for a few games in a row here. I think that's going to be his spot going forward. However, the third line is going to be in a blender, and I'm hoping that this is kind of what it sticks with. However, they could change between Lawton and Domi depending on who's playing better at the center. But Craig Berube, and there's multiple tweets from James Myrtle, I believe David Alter as well. Basically, Berube was not messing around today. You can see here, very intense practice for the Leafs. Berube is not messing around. And it's at the point now where there is no time to mess around, but you're now down 2 points against the Florida Panthers, which is something that is unfortunate, especially because you had the chance to make up ground there. You need to do everything in your power to win the Atlantic Division because we've been speaking about this ad nauseum. Obviously, no easy team. There's no slouches at this point between Ottawa, Tampa, or Florida, whoever you play. But you want to avoid Florida at all costs. And if you specifically don't win the Atlantic Division and somehow Tampa Bay comes back, playing Florida on the road round one would be nightmare fuel for any team in the NHL. But you need to win the Atlantic Division here. At least it would be very helpful. And Craig Berube, I think, knows that as well. And he was stopping practice, dropping F-bombs a few times. The intensity level for the players here, I'm hoping, is going to pick up.
The thing for me with this, coming into practice this morning, obviously big game tomorrow night, is if you push everything away, right? Like if you stop thinking about the potential playoff matchups, the fact that they're only 2 points behind the division lead and they should have been in the division lead at this point. If you push all that away and stop thinking about that for a second, if you just look at the game on Saturday in a vacuum, like Berube said after the game, there was no reason to lose that game. There was zero reason to lose that game. And in the fashion that they did, there was absolutely no reason for it. So he seemed pissed off after the game on Saturday. Seems like that's continued through the weekend into today. And again, dropping F-bombs in practice this morning, having them restart drills, stuff like that, because the intensity wasn't there. And picking out specific players from, all accounts this morning that's what was happening. So this is the type of stuff that they needed and that we haven't really seen the last couple of years. So I'm glad that he's taking it as seriously as the fan base and everybody knows that they should take it, right? So I'm glad that that's the case, and the pace was a little bit higher at practice this morning because Saturday was unacceptable. And heading into tomorrow, if you lose that game or if it's another poor performance, we do have a problem here. We absolutely have a problem heading into the playoffs.
And now we're only less than a month away from the playoffs. And an update again regarding Max Pacioretty. And this one's interesting. So Nick Barton initially tweeted, as Maple Leafs practice begins, Max Pacioretty is on his own pad doing work. And the reason the screenshot's like this, the tweet was actually deleted afterwards. So take this with a grain of salt. He was on the ice and it seems he was doing his own pad work, but for some reason he deleted the tweet. So maybe it wasn't his own pad work. Maybe it is Max Pacioretty. You can see him right there. Darius, right. This one becomes more interesting by the day here. I still think there's probably a world, and that's something we haven't discussed the lines. We'll do it closer to playoff time, that he comes back and factors in for a guy like Pontus Holmberg, or depending on how they go with these lines, could factor in for Calle Jarnkrok instead, and then putting him in the third line, fourth line, whatever it ends up being. But it seems like he's inching closer and closer to a return by all accounts here, and it's interesting that the tweet was deleted. Could also just be he didn't. Maybe there was a reason that he did it that isn't necessarily directly correlated to the injury or anything like that. But at the end of the day, we wanted to keep you guys updated on that. So the tweet was deleted, but at the same time, he is doing his own pad work.
Now, taking this into account, the fact that the tweet was deleted and there's nothing else on, I couldn't find anything else on Twitter from any of the other reporters that he was on the ice skating. And the fact that this was deleted makes me believe that maybe they don't want people to know that he's skating on his own and that he is healthy at this point and that he will factor into the playoff lineup. I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point. But for those of you who were in our stream a couple days ago, I have to give credit. Jim did say that he was at Ford Performance Center and that he did see Max Pacioretty skating on his own. So he is skating. We know that from this tweet that was deleted this morning. So I do think that he's going to factor into maybe game one, game two of the playoffs here, and they're just kind of finding spots for guys like Lawton at this point. I do think Lawton will probably end up going down to the fourth line in the playoffs, and then Pacioretty will take Holmberg's spot on third line left wing. So it's going to be interesting, but it seems like he's healthy now. The only reason he can't get into games, and the same thing goes for obviously Hakanpää if he were to be healthy right now, is because of the salary cap, right? Because all the guys they took on while they were on LTIR at the trade deadline. So I think he's only going to be able to get reactivated after the season ends, and unless there is an injury in the meantime, but obviously you never know if that's going to happen, right? Hopefully not, but I think that's the case right now. And the fact that it was deleted, again, I don't want to put too much attention on it, but it is a thing that we have to discuss because this is an update for the Leafs. It looks like he is progressing, and I do think he'll get into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what the lines shape up there. A couple other things. Got a lot in this time with the Leafs so far. It's been crazy. I'm starting to find my footing. I think my game in Nashville is one of my better ones. Build on it. It doesn't matter the role here. I think you can try help win and help this team, of course. At the end of the day, I think I agree with him. His game against Nashville was the best, overshadowed by the horrible loss given the situation. But let us know down below what your thoughts are on the Scott Laughton thing. One final stat I wanted to bring up here surrounding Morgan Rielly, as only one player has spent his entire season on a playoff team and is minus 20 or worse. And that is Morgan Rielly at minus 22. And you also see Scott Laughton there. To be fair, you also see Gustav Nyquist and Seth Jones. No, I don't want to pile on the hate Morgan Rielly. Also, he's been on the ice for, I believe, 16 empty net goals or something like that. A crazy amount of empty net goals. Might not be 16, but a lot of empty net goals. So that also, of course, contributes to plus minus, even though it probably shouldn't. I want to get your thoughts on this before I wrap up here, because I know it's been a big conversation. Riley's been very bad, and Singh's got a lot in there as well. Rub some salt into the wound.
Yeah, I mean, he's been awful this season. We know that it's not a surprise. But the thing with some of these names, like Scott Lawton, for example, and Seth Jones, they just got traded to their playoff teams. They weren't on playoff teams before. They were on awful teams. So let's keep that in mind as well when we look at these stats. So, Morgan Riley's been here the whole year. So he's had a very tough go this year, and he's got to get it together in the next couple weeks. I'm not sure if it's going to happen because it hasn't happened all year, but they're going to need him to play better if they're going to find success in the playoffs because, he makes a lot of money and he has to be that guy for them.
Yeah, let us know down below what your thoughts are on that. Ton of new updates. We're going to keep you up to date with all this news. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. See you guys later.